Hi there. I expect you're wondering what the hell I'm doing in front of the camera instead of behind the camera. I'm beginning to wonder that myself actually. But I've got some big changes coming up and I wanted to tell you about it, and I thought the video was the best way of doing it. Um, basically, over the last few months, or since about October last year, I've been in complete turmoil in my personal life. I've just admitted to myself and accepted that I'm actually a transgender woman, and that I need to change my body. So commonly what most people would call as a sex change. Sorry if that's a real shock to you. It's a shock to me as well. But here's a bit of background.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this week's The Double 15 Minutes. So shortly, I'm going to be bringing Katie on to talk about her journey, her transitional journey from being Martin to being Katie. It will be a very raw, open, and authentic interview, because the one thing that I've learned about Katie over the last few weeks of speaking to her is that she is probably one of the most genuine, authentic women I have had the privilege of meeting. Now, there's been so much in the news recently about the LGBTQIA community. There's a lot of information out there that is being shared amongst different communities to help us understand sort of the LGBTQIA, to help us understand, I suppose, marginalised groups. And also more and more is coming forward in terms of information and helping us to acknowledge and to build our awareness with compassion of the transgender community. Because imagine being born into the wrong body and knowing that this is not the gender you are. Imagine the turmoil that you go through every single day because the body you're in is completely alien to you. Now, I know a lot of the times we'll watch TV, we'll watch shows, and they sometimes will turn these things into jokes or laughter or something to laugh about. But actually, is it really a laughing matter? I don't think so, because it takes a lot of courage to actually stand up and say, this isn't me, this is who I am, and I am going to now fight for myself to be the person who I am. So let's bring Katie on to talk about her courageous, very courageous journey. And yeah, any questions, please do put them in the comments section. Katie is very, very open, and any questions for her, please do ask. So we've got Chandrika Singh watching with us, and Rama Joshi has joined us as well, so thank you both. We are broadcasting across YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So wherever you're watching us from, please, just put your name in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, where in the country you're watching from, or in the world even. So without further ado, let's bring Katie on. Katie, hi, how are you?
Hi, Rupa. I'm fine, thanks. Lovely to see you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh no, thank you so much for coming on, because I know that you've got so much going on at the moment. So I think last week alone, why don't you tell us how many you're doing?
It's been a very busy week. This will actually have been the 8th time that I will have told my story this week.
Wow.
It's been crazy, because it was International Transgender Day of Visibility on Wednesday. So I was back to back. I was full on that day. I had 3 gigs on that day, but it's just gone out through the whole week. So it's been busy week.
Yeah. And it must be quite sort of uplifting to a certain extent that actually there are people now wanting to know not just your story, but the story of the transgender community in general. Because it's not just a case of I've been born into the wrong body, I need to become something. There's a whole process that goes around it, and also I suppose the emotional turmoil as well. So how does it make you feel that people are actually becoming a lot more, I suppose, open and receptive to the transgender?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's certainly a lot easier now. I mean, it's hard coming out. It's really hard. I mean, you saw my coming out video at the start. I mean, I'll talk a bit about that later. But
mm,
it's really, really hard coming out. But it's easier now than
mm,
it's ever been. I mean, you go back even 5 years and it's that much harder. Go back 30 years is really hard. So think of all those people that transitioned back then, so much harder. So
mm.
um yeah, I think there's more and more sort of gobby trans people like me sticking our heads above the parapet and sort of educating people, and I think that's only a good thing, and it helps you know not exactly encourage, but it shows other trans people that it really is okay to be trans, because a lot of them put a lot of pressure on themselves, and they really needn't do.
And the thing is, it's like, there are, there are so many trans people out there who haven't transitioned yet, who haven't actually spoken up, in the same way. And this is by no means, saying it's the same thing, but it's like you've got certain communities, certain, cultural communities
Mm,
where people are living double lives. No way is it the same thing,
mm.
but it is. It's the same but different, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So, tell me, Katie. I mean, like, when did you first know, or realise that you'd been born into the wrong body?
well, I've got to go right back to my earliest memories, really, age
Mm,
of around 3 or 4.
mm,
I was born 51 years ago, and as is still the established custom now, I was assigned a sex based purely on my physical sex characteristics, i.e., what was between my legs. I was assigned male at birth,
mm,
and I was given the name Martin Albert Neeves. So that was me, labelled.
yeah,
So go on to, obviously I can't remember when I was born, and nobody can, but my earliest memories around 3 or 4. One of
mm,
my earliest memories was of my mum catching me trying on a pair of my sister's knickers. And I remember when I tried them on, it
mm,
felt so right. I felt right.
mm,
But then my mum caught me and she told me off. She told me to take them off. And for
mm,
every day of the following week, she would pull my shorts down and she would check to make sure I was wearing my own pants. And it was humiliating, but it sowed the seeds for a very long time that what
mm,
I did was wrong. It was dirty. It was naughty. It was not what respectable people did. But
yeah,
however much my mum told me off about it, the urge and the need to cross dress as it was then
mm,
would always be with me.
yeah,
And so throughout my childhood, I would always secretly dress in my sister's clothes whenever I had the opportunity. And
mm,
whenever I did it, it would always feel so right. But then those feelings of feeling right were
yeah,
very quickly overtaken by feelings of shame and guilt and self-loathing.
mm,
And it was many years before I'd even admit to myself that then I was a cross dresser, because it wasn't what respectable people did. That wasn't me. No, I was fighting against. I was in self-denial, and that
mm,
happened for many years. And this vicious. So every time I did it, I would promise myself that I would never ever do it again. And I tried so hard to not do it. I really did, because it's not what respectable people did. So,
oh,
but however much I tried, the urge to dress always came back, and usually with a vicious, with a vengeance. And this vicious cycle went right on until my mid-20s. And by then, I'd trained to become a press photographer. I was working on newspapers in Kent then, because I was living down there. And before leaving there and moving up to the Midlands, when I got a job as a senior staff photographer with the
mm,
Coventry Evening Telegraph. Stayed there for 5 years before leaving to set up my own photography and video business, which are called Martin Neeves Photography and Film.
mm.
Bit of a problem there later in life, as you can imagine. Top tip: if you're going to start a business, don't call it after your name.
But then again, we are living, sometimes we are living in a bit of a misogynistic society, so maybe having a Martin Neeves is
You never know. You never know. Yeah. So, so,
good.
so anyway, to by my mid-20s, I got a successful business and I got married for the first time. And it was only in my mid-20s that I finally accepted and embraced the fact that
Mm,
then I was a cross-dresser.
mm,
And I realized that I had a condition called gender dysphoria. And what that is a great feeling of unease and distress caused by a mismatch between how I felt in my head and my heart, i.e., my gender
mm,
identity, as
mm.
opposed to my physical sex characteristics and the label that I've been given at birth.
Yeah.
And the thing with gender dysphoria is that it can vary in intensity and it very often increases over time. And that's exactly what happened with me. And I was completely unprepared for it. I really was. And
Mm,
the thing is, at the time, the level of gender dysphoria was low enough that it was satisfied by my occasional cross dressing. So
mm,
at the time, I knew what it was, and I quantified it. I was happy as a man who needed to cross dress, and that was all it was.
Yeah.
I treated it more like a hobby that I would always be part of me. I'd always need to do it, but it was just a hobby but I was happy as a man who needed to cross dress. That was all it was.
Mm.
Never in a million years thought that I would eventually need to transition. I really didn't.
Yeah,
So,
because there is sort of like there is a vast difference, isn't there, between a cross dresser, a transvestite, and transgender. And I'm sure you're going to come to that.
yeah, it all comes from having gender dysphoria.
Mm.
But or conversely, gender euphoria, feeling so right when you are dressing in the opposite clothes to the sex that you're assigned at birth. But
Mm.
transvestite basically is just the old and outdated word for cross-dresser. So
Okay.
they're basically the same thing, but
Mm.
that's just an old word. Transgender basically is the newer word for what people call transsexual. It's also an umbrella term which for all gender non-conforming people, so it
Mm.
covers all sorts, but is the modern word for transsexual. Transsexuals tends to be only used now in medicine and in law.
Mm.
So you tend not to use that these days. So that's basically the terminology. But let's say, going back to my story, when it's in my mid-20s, I finally accepted and embraced the fact that I was a cross-dresser.
Mm.
So yeah, I got married for the first time in mid-20s, and my first marriage lasted for 13 years, although we should have split sooner because my first wife never accepted my cross-dressing,
Mm.
and there's also another thing, was that she didn't want kids, but I did, and I always thought that as she got older she might change her mind, as some women do, but she didn't. And because as I was approaching 40,
Mm.
the urge to be a dad was getting stronger, and so I felt that I needed to do something about it, and so it was a shame because we loved each other and we were a great team, but I just wanted to really be myself and be with somebody who would be okay with me being myself, and also wanted kids. So I instigated the first divorce, and then while I was going through my first divorce, I then went on to meet a woman who would eventually become my second wife.
Mm.
And I decided to tell her about my cross-dressing on our second date. Thought the first date was probably pushing it. Hello, do you come here often? Oh, look, we've got matching knickers. Doesn't really work, does it? But
Well, it depends. It depends on who the person is and
well,
how.
exactly. But I thought that I didn't want to be with anybody
Mm.
who couldn't cope with it, and so
Yeah.
I thought I didn't want to get emotionally involved with them, because through all the pain of splitting
Mm.
up before. So I thought I'd tell them up front straight away. And to my surprise and to my delight, she was okay with it. But
Mm.
there were conditions attached. So she said, as long as I didn't do it more than once a week. But in
Mm.
those days, I didn't. The once a week was fine to satisfy the level of gender dysphoria that I had. That was
Mm.
okay. And then she also said, "Well, as long as you don't want to transition." Well,
Mm.
I absolutely didn't want to transition. I was happy as a man who needed to cross dress, so that was
Mm.
fine. So our relationship blossomed, and then 9 years ago, we had a beautiful baby daughter who was the absolute
Yeah.
center of my universe.
Mm.
But it was many years before we got married, because after the pain and the cost of my first divorce, I always said I'd never get married again. But eventually I weakened and I proposed. And then in August 2017, we got married.
Okay.
However, a few months before we got married, I just happened to meet a spiritual guide and clairvoyant at a business networking meeting.
Mm.
Now, this is the point that you have my full permission to have your eyebrows raised. I'm just trying to see if you have.
Oh, no. I have a lot of my really close friends are clairvoyants, psychics, and mediums.
Brilliant.
So yeah.
Brilliant. But it's funny, I don't know if you go to many business networking meetings, but you tend not to meet people like clairvoyants there. You meet lots of people
Absolutely.
like accountants and financial advisors and people like, nothing wrong with those people. Lots of my friends are those sort of people. But
Mm.
clairvoyants are just fascinating to talk to.
Yeah.
And I was so intrigued by that. I was
Mm.
talking to her for most of the evening. And then at the end of the evening, I thought, oh, I'm going to book up for a reading. I didn't really feel the need for a reading or anything, but I thought, I'll just go.
Yeah.
I went along, but she blew me away. She was incredible. She
Mm.
said so many things that were just so true, so pinpoint accurate, that she couldn't have guessed, and she couldn't have found out from my website or my social media or anything. But then she said a lot of other things that just didn't make sense at the time. Now
Mm.
they make perfect sense now, but they didn't at the time.
Yeah.
You know, she said things like, "There's a new way of being," and she said,
Mm.
um, there's an issue that you've always known about, but that you're not fully in integrity with." And she said, "Spirit want you to go off into the countryside and go for a long walk, talk to
Mm.
yourself, talk to nature, and talk to spirit, and they will show you what you need to see."
Yeah.
So I thought, "Oh, okay, well, I like walking. What the hell?"
Yeah.
But I was really busy at the time because I was busy with my work, and it was the run up to our wedding. So there was a lot of stuff going on. So I just didn't have the time to take myself off for a
Mm.
long walk. But so in the meantime, in August 2017, we got
Yeah.
married. But then it wasn't until very early November 2017 that I found the time to take myself off for this long walk
Mm.
in the countryside. I went over to Rutland Water because I love it over there.
Yeah.
And I worked out this really long route around the southern bit of the countryside and then came back along the south shore. And I
Mm.
remember it now, it was a beautiful day, a bit like today, actually. There was
Yeah.
blue sky, the sun was shining, very cold, crisp, clear day.
Mm.
And I remember I went off with my map and my compass and my walking boots and my backpack, and I was
Yeah.
striding it out. I was on a mission. I was talking to myself, I was
Mm.
talking to nature, I was talking to spirit,
Yeah.
whoever they were.
Mm.
And I remember feeling disappointed at the time because I was naively expecting some sort of light bulb moment or some sort of voice to say, "This is what you should be seeing."
Yeah.
Strangely, Rupa, that didn't happen. I can't imagine why. And I thought, "Oh, perhaps I've done it wrong. Perhaps I
Yeah.
should have just sat serenely by the water's edge looking out at the reservoir." You know? But strangely, whether it's a coincidence or not, I really don't know. Strangely,
Mm.
around about the same sort of time, my
Mm.
gender dysphoria
Yeah.
increased dramatically. It went through the roof. You know,
Yeah.
so much so that I just didn't know what gender I was at all. And I was so desperate to find out. I was even typing into Google, "What gender is Martin Neeves?"
Mm.
Oh, that's crazy because the answer could only come from me. It couldn't come from anywhere else, particularly Google. But
Yeah.
I was desperate for
Mm.
information, and it's what desperate people do. Yeah.
Oh, well, no, of course.
Um,
It's the thing is, it's like, I mean, like at the end of the day, it's like you'd been living your whole life sort of like being told it was bad, it was bad, it was bad, and then you've met this wonderful woman who has said, okay, you know what, I'm not 100% okay with it, but I love and respect you enough to understand you. And I think maybe it was part of that was, the first time that somebody had accepted that part of you outside of yourself.
it could be, or I mean, I don't know quite what triggered it. I really don't know. But anyway,
Mm.
it happened anyway that way. And so the thing is, I was in complete turmoil about my gender identity. I just didn't know what gender I was, and so the thing is, I couldn't tell my wife about my inner turmoil because I didn't want to stir up a hornet's nest
Yeah.
unnecessarily if it turned out to be something nothing. But then also, if I did tell her, it would lead to her asking me questions, which at the time
Mm.
I just didn't have the answers to. I just didn't know what gender I was at all. I
Yeah.
really didn't know. So I just had to face it on my own. So the first thing I decided to do was to get some counselling. And I
Mm.
found a counsellor who had experience of dealing with people with gender issues. And I had 4 sessions with her. And in hindsight, I think I should have had more sessions because um, I wrongly concluded at the end of those sessions that I was gender fluid.
Mm.
Now, I'll explain what that is. So, we're all brought up to think of gender being the same as sex, but it's
Mm.
not. Gender is about how you feel as your own sense of self in your own head, in your head and your heart. Whereas sex is about the sex you've been assigned. You know what's on your birth certificate
Yeah.
and your physical primary sex characteristics, what's between your legs.
Mm.
And for 99% of the population, they coincide. And to them, I
Mm.
say, lucky them. But for about 1% of the population, which is not to be sniffed at, because if you've got
Mm.
a population of about 66 million people, that's about 660,000 people. It's a
Mm.
lot of people.
Mm.
They don't coincide, and so it causes us to look at where we are.
Mm.
But let's look at sex to begin with. So sex itself, when a baby's born, um, the doctor or midwife looks between the baby's legs,
Mm.
and basically all they look at is the appearance of the genitals. Well, as babies, we're just born as just babies with bits
Yeah.
everywhere. We've got bits between our legs, bits
Mm.
between our ears, bits inside our bodies, bits on the ends of our arms and legs, bits everywhere. But the
Yeah.
only bits that count for the birth certificate are the bits between your legs.
Mm.
And then the doctor or midwife has got this binary choice. They have to choose between boy or girl to put on the birth certificate. That's all they can put on there.
Yeah.
But sex isn't binary. Yet nature is very messy, and
Mm.
there are a lot of intersex people, because we tend to think of sex as being about chromosomes XX or XY, but a lot of people with an extra chromosome. It's about 2%. It's just under 2%, which is about the same number of people in this country who've got ginger hair. Now, not necessarily the same people. Before you think all you people with ginger hair, but it's about the same number. So that just quantify it. And so I've got friends who are intersex. There's one I think can think of, and she identifies as female because that's her gender. In terms of her sex, she's got a vagina, but then she's got internal testes, and so. But obviously those couldn't be seen at birth, and so she was assigned female at birth. But she's intersex, So nature is very messy. So just as sex isn't binary, gender isn't binary either, and so there's a whole spectrum, and it's not linear either. Some people are what's called agender, so they don't have a gender at all. But just for simplicity purposes today, think of it as being linear, and think of 100% male at one end, 100% female at the other end.
Yeah.
Nobody's at 100% of either. We're all a mixture of the two. But for most people whose gender coincide with their sex characteristics, they've had no need to look at where they are on the spectrum, because they would just assign what it was. It hasn't caused them any problems. They think that's all they are. But we're all somewhere on this spectrum.
Yeah.
And the people that sit roughly in the middle, they're non-binary. So they don't identify as either male or female. And then for gender fluid people, they're roughly in the middle, but then sometimes they feel female, sometimes they feel male.
Yeah.
And all these things are perfectly acceptable and perfectly natural and perfectly normal ways of being a human being. There's nothing wrong with the human beings. There's a lot wrong with the labeling system that we're having to adopt. So at the time, I thought that I was gender fluid. And I realize now why I came to that conclusion. It was my fear of admitting to myself that I was a transgender woman that was stopping me from it was making me hang on to any bit of masculinity that I had. And so that's what it was. But at the same time as doing that, I was also working through a self-help workbook called You and Your Gender Identity. It's by a gender therapist from the States called Dara Hoffman Fox. Absolutely brilliant book. It's like psychotherapy in a book. And there's a lot of work involved in it, and it took me about 2 months to work my way through it. But when I got to about 3/4 of the way through the book, it became obvious that I wasn't gender fluid, and that I was, in fact, a transgender woman. And then by the time I got to the end of that book, that conclusion hadn't changed. So now I had two conclusions.
Yeah.
They were different. So what can I do now? So I thought, I know, I'll send a text back to the clairvoyant. So I sent this text back, and she sent a text back to me. She said, "Oh, it's funny, I was expecting your text." No, she didn't. That was just a cheap joke. I just can't help myself.
I have a friend of mine who is he is an amazing psychic medium. Actually, he was on the show quite a few months ago when I first started doing this. And then if ever I do message him, he'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I was expecting a call from you." It says, "No, you weren't. You didn't." So we have this whole, but did you though?
Yeah, no, that was just a cheap joke in there. I couldn't resist that bit. but anyway, I should point out that she's not just some sort of mystic Meg sitting in a caravan with a crystal ball predicting the lottery numbers. But to be honest, with the state of my finances at the moment, that might be quite handy. So if any of your viewers know of anybody like that, then if they can just put the phone number in the chat, that would be really good. That'd be fantastic.
Talking about viewers, before we continue, we've had some comments coming in. So we've had a few more people joining us. So Bhavna Patel's joined us. She's saying hello to you both. Happy Easter. Happy Easter.
Hi, Bhavna.
Councillor Pretty Joshi has joined. She's saying, lovely to see you, Katie. Heard a lot about you from Rachel.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, lovely. Yeah,
we all have Rachel in common between all of us.
Rachel's fab.
Pretty's also said, Katie, do you feel that the new label transgender is more acceptable by the public? And then before you answer that, there's one more. Bhavna's saying, very interesting and great learning session. This gives a better understanding. So let's go back before you continue with the story. Let's go to what Pretty's asked. calling it transgender rather than sort of like cross-dresser, transvestite, because I know we had a conversation the other day about the hermaphrodites, where you said sort of like it's now intersex, because hermaphrodite
That's
is
right. That's the new
a very
name for it. Yeah.
old phrase. But do you think transgender is a more acceptable label?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think. Yeah. So basically, transgender, say, there's an umbrella term, but then also as a more specific, what you would use to call transsexual. I
Mm,
think it's a much softer term. It's a much nicer word. I much prefer to be called transgender or trans than transsexual. Also, transsexual just tends to sort of dehumanize you a little bit, and so because people used to
mm.
describe people as transsexuals rather than whether I prefer to be called a trans person. I'm a person. You
Yeah,
know,
but because it sounds very cold and clinical,
it
doesn't
does. It does.
it? Now, here's my question, because you mentioned earlier about, sort of like there was a level of fear in terms of sort of like you fully admitting to yourself
Oh,
that
huge,
you're transgender.
massive.
Was that fear your own internal fear, or was it a fear that had been projected onto you by, say, bless our parents, because they can only do what they
Yeah.
do on their thing. What was it? Was it a fear that was like, if you didn't have any of these restrictions that
Mm,
the world puts on all of us, let's be honest, we're all put into boxes. But I think the LGBTQ community, tend to be put in even deeper boxes. So
mm.
if you didn't have these labels and these sometimes derogatory labels, would
Mm.
that fear have been there, or was it an externally pressured fear?
I think it's both, to be honest. I think the external pressure uh, causes the internal pressure
Mm,
and the fear. So you got to remember, I was a child growing up in the 70s, and you got to remember the culture then. So you just look at the situation with gay people then. So it was only 2 years before I was born
mm,
that it became partially legalized to be a gay man.
mm,
It was always so and it was only partially legalized then. So and it's unthinkable to think that it was illegal, but it was 1967 that it was made legal, or partially legal. And but then, even then, in the 70s, there was a lot of gay bashing going on, and it was like an acceptable thing that people, gay people would be beaten up. It was horrendous. So there's a massive stigma if anybody came out as being gay. But obviously, but trans people, that was just like unheard of then. And so and and you look at how far gay and lesbian people have come in since then. I think bisexual people are some way behind gay and lesbian people, but then trans people, we're about 30 years behind them. We really are. So
mm.
we're a long way behind. So I don't know if you can hear a coughing noise. My cat is next to me, and
Is it-
you did say to me when I spoke. He's decided to have a coffee. Oh no! Hopefully he stopped. Hopefully it's just a furball. But you did say open the door, let him in. So I
Do you
did.
know, my show is all about diversity and inclusion.
So
It's
we'll
a very
include a
inclusive.
coughing cat as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. So
Poor
it
thing.
sounded a bit like my dad having his morning coffee. Actually, no, my dad doesn't sound anything like that, but it was quite funny. But we've had a few more comments. So Pretty's also said, just another point in question. Are we drawing too much attention to labels for people? People are people, no matter how they choose to be and live. And Ramajoshi has said that interesting topic for for humans, because we are all humans at the end
Yeah.
of the day. Should it matter what our genitalia is telling us, or what our sexual preferences, or what our skin color is saying?
No, it shouldn't matter at all. We're all just human beings. We should celebrate diversity in whatever form it takes.
Yeah,
I think labels can serve a purpose sometimes in that they help to give you a sense of belonging especially when you're in need of support from other people going through similar things. So I think they can be useful. Yeah, but and certainly within the LGBTQIA plus community, there are loads of labels just in that the name in itself, in the acronym itself. There are just so many, and it can be useful. But yeah, we're all just people. Yeah.
and this is it. So we've had a few more people. So we've had Adam Riley join us. Hey, Adam, hope you're well.
Hi.
And it just, sort of like going back to the whole thing, sort of like, the fact that there was a level of fear you'd said, and then, you know, sort of like speaking to the counsellor, having the number of sessions, doing your Google search as to who is Martin Neeves, you know, and all of that. What was, you know, what then were the next steps? Because I mean, this is 2017, so it's not that long ago.
No, not long ago at all. So what happened after that? So I contacted this clairvoyant, and then she sent a text back saying, you invited me and said, well, why don't you have a vision quest session? And what that is, it's a 4-hour interactive process. It's a big old process, it really is. And with that, she uses techniques such as deep meditation to get you to a really relaxed state and to allow you to get past all your fear and access your inner truth. So I went along for that session on the 11th of January 2018. It's a date I will never forget. And during that session, she didn't give me any answers at all. She just asked me a series of questions. It was question after question after question after question. It was relentless. Now, whether she got the questions from spirit or not, I haven't got a clue. She asked me all the questions, but she allowed all the answers to come from me and from my inner truth. It was such an emotional session. I cried buckets that day. I really did. And it was during that session, or the end of that session, that I admitted to myself that I am a transgender woman and that I need to change my body. And that was the point that I really felt female. I really felt that Martin had stepped back and Katie had taken over. And it felt so right. And it's felt so right ever since. It really has. So now I had discovered my true gender identity. You know, what now? What was I going to do with this new piece of information eating away at me? You know, I had a happy home life. I had a successful business. You know, could I put all of that in jeopardy just for this new piece of information eating away at me? On the other hand, could I go back to living how I was before with this new piece of information eating away at me? I didn't think I could. And the trouble is, once you know your true gender identity, you can't unknow it. You know, that particular genie just wasn't going back in the bottle. And the thing is, I didn't want to be trans. No one does, as it invariably involves a lot of loss, pain, and heartache, as well as having to deal with prejudice and bigotry on the way. Yeah, no one chooses to be trans. You know, it's blooming hard. You know? But the only choice I had was whether I decided to transition or not. And the research that I did showed that most trans people who decide to transition after the initial loss, pain, and heartache and bumpy journey along the way, usually go on to lead happy and contented lives. Whereas many trans people who decide not to transition, but they very often end up in a spiral of depression or often worse. So the urge to live my truth was just so overwhelmingly strong. You know, I was finally at peace with myself. I knew who I was. So I just had to face this head on. I really did. So I would say man up, but that's probably the wrong thing to say.
Human up.
Terrible thing to say. I just do it for I do it for devilment to wind people up. Right, you'll get used to it.
You grew a pair. Well, actually, no, you lost a pair. But
so
I never offend anybody. I have a very inappropriate sense of humour as well.
So the next thing I had, the next challenge I had, was to tell my wife about this. And I don't mind admitting that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. No, actually, the hardest thing I had to do was to admit to myself I was trans. The next hardest thing was to tell my wife. And it took me a whole month to pluck up courage to tell her. I was so frightened of telling. In fact, I was so frightened, I wrote her a letter just in case my words didn't come out right. In the event my words did come out right, but I gave her the letter at the end anyway. Because she had something to refer to, because she was in complete shock. It was such a bombshell that I dropped on her. I felt awful about it. It was terrible. It really was. And I hated doing it. And suffice to say that the news went down as badly as you'd expect. And I ought to point out at this stage that sexuality and gender are completely separate entities, and they're not linked. So in my case, I've always been attracted to women, and I still am. It's been one of the constants in my life. It's just that the labels changed. So previously I was labelled as a heterosexual man. Now I'm labelled as a lesbian. It feels absolutely no different to me. It feels exactly as I always have done. I just fancy women. That's it. But
what is it? So we've had, sorry, before you continue, we've had, because I think Adam joined us a little bit later, so he missed the beginning part of it where he's asking, did you know you were transgender from an early age? And you'd said earlier that, you knew.
Well, I knew that I was different. I knew I sort of felt like a girl, from an early age, but I didn't know that I was trans then. And I think a lot of it's just because of the culture and just because of the time I was brought up in. I was in the early 70s. It was a big taboo. And whereas I think now there's more younger trans people coming out and admitting themselves trans, because there's so much more information out there. You've got the internet now. There's people like me that's sort of sticking your head above the parapet and showing what it is. So I think it's made it a lot easier for people now, whereas then, you know, it was just so much harder, and it's something I had to hide. So but it's to say it was only at the age of 48 that I admitted to myself I was trans.
I mean, the thing is, it's like you were saying, though, and we'll go back to your story in terms of, sort of when you spoke to your wife about it. But I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that actually living as your unauthentic self was actually that much harder than it would have been to live as your authentic self. I think this is sort of like the sort of the cognitive dissonance that a lot of people live with, isn't it? It's like, you know, you living inauthentically and just please everybody else around us, or do we choose to be authentic and true to ourselves and follow what our hearts are telling us to do?
There was always that conflict, and it was living that double life, and it was awful, and it was having to, I mean, I was skulking around. I used to, I still do, go to beauty therapists, and they beauty therapists have helped me a lot, and they've become really good friends of mine, and so I would go to salon, and so I'd go there as Martin. They'd do my makeup, and I'd put my wig on, and then I'd get dressed, and then I'd go out for the day shopping, and then because I knew them well, I'd go back to one of their houses, and I'd get changed for the evening, and then a whole load of us would go out. We'd have a girls' night out, and it was fantastic. Just to feel one of the girls was amazing. It felt great, but then it came, the end of the evening came all too soon, and then I had to pack Katie away and go back to being Martin again, and I had to get changed. And well, initially I used to get changed, go back to their house or to the salon or whatever, and just get changed back, and then I'd come back as Martin. But then as I got a bit bolder later on, I used to come back as Katie, but it was under cover of darkness. So I was, because I was afraid of the neighbours seeing me, and I'd creep in, like, I reckon I'd be brilliant in the SAS. It was amazing that not once did I get caught, and I can't believe that I didn't get caught.
Well, if anybody from the SAS or MI5 or MI6 is watching, you need someone's stealth.
I think I could do it. I reckon I'd be up for it. But it's crazy. I had to, that went on for years. I was doing that. And it was my dirty secret. It was awful.
See, the toll it would take mentally to be living this lie. Because it is living a lie, to be living that double life and to live it. I mean, I can imagine that. There are so many people out there who are continuing to live because they're too, they're afraid of actually, sort of like, I don't know, coming out, for want of a better word, or, to seek the support. Because did you find, and we'll go back to the story in a minute. So it's saying, Lisa Aladefa says, packing Katie away feels like a sad thing. And, that's what we're saying. It's like, you were high who you were. You want to sort of like tell us a little bit more about sort of like the emotional turmoil around it?
It was awful. I hated it. Every time, it was wonderful. I'd have had the day out as the real me, and it just felt fantastic just to be accepted, and just, I wasn't out to sort of, well, as you can see, I don't sort of dress like a drag act or a pantomime dame or anything. I just dressed to blend in, just wear clothes that are appropriate for the occasion, and so I just want to blend in, and that's all I wanted to do, and just be accepted as a woman, and that's all. And it was awful having to pack Katie away and go back to being Martin. It was awful, and at the end of every night of that, I hated it. It was just taking my makeup. I never wanted to take my makeup off and then go back to being Martin again. It was awful.
Yeah, and I completely, whilst I can't, I will never know what that feels like, but I can completely, I can empathise with you in terms of the emotions of having to be someone you're not.
Most might be quite emotional thinking about that, actually. I haven't thought about it for quite a while, to be honest. That's quite interesting.
But no, I mean, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, because at the end of the day, it's like, I think there are so many people, like I said, out there that are, sort of like gender assigned men who actually are not. They want to be a woman. There are gender assigned women that actually feel trapped in their body and want to be men, and they may not know where to turn, and they may be feeling that what their emotions are abnormal or what they're feeling. So actually, you sharing the emotions it's potentially, you know, because I always say that even if you help one person understand themselves, then, you know, you've done an amazing thing.
Absolutely. And I get contacted by a lot of trans people because I'm reasonably high profile now, and yeah, so often they can be either in the state of self-denial, or they've just admitted it to themselves, but then they're absolutely frightened because they don't, you know, they don't know what to do, and that, but they know that that's who they are, but they're so frightened. They think that the world is going to implode on them, but it's really not. I mean, my world has expanded enormously. It really has. You know, yeah,
But it's like that. It's that quote, isn't it? It's the fear is far greater than the actual event. So the fear of the fear is far bigger than actually just sort of like biting the bullet and saying, you know what, I'm going for this, because
that's exactly what I found. Yeah.
I can't live like this anymore. So we've had a few more people joining us. We've had Mangesh Murudkar joining us. Hi Mangesh, hope you're well. And has joined us as well. She's saying, hey ladies. She's joined us from, it looks like, LinkedIn. Katie, going back to, you know, you said that you obviously sort of like would go out on your night out with beauticians and come home, and you know your wife or ex-wife now, telling her was one of the hardest things you've done.
Yeah.
What, you know, I mean, how, and I want to respect your privacy, her privacy, and your daughter's privacy. So, you know, tell us what you can, and if there are bits that you don't want to tell us, that's absolutely fine as well. But what was the process? How did you cope with it? How did she cope with it? And
it was very difficult. It's a really tough time, to be honest, and it was awful for her, and awful for my daughter as well. It was a very difficult time. So I don't want to go too much onto that, but I think because I did make a promise to her that I wouldn't involve her, but obviously it's important to mention what I have, because both of them are an important part of my story, and so I think I sort of feel as if I sort of need to sort of say what I do, but basically we tried counselling, but unfortunately that didn't work. So you know, because obviously obviously her sexuality hadn't changed, my sexuality hadn't changed, but her label hadn't changed. She was still attracted to men, so it was a mismatch. And we tried counselling, but unfortunately it didn't work. For some trans people, and certainly with couples that is in the situation, it does work, and I know quite a few where it does work. So it's, you know, by no means everybody does it, but it is very common for couples in this situation to split. And unfortunately, we were one of those. And so unfortunately, that meant the end of my second marriage. So it was a very short marriage, even though we'd been together for a long time. It was a short marriage. But the next dilemma I had was what to do about the name of my photography and video business when I changed my name to Katie, because it was very strongly branded after my old male name. It was called Martin Neeves Photography and Film. Because I don't know. I don't know if I told you. Because I after I left the Coventry and Telegraph, I set up that business. And the thing is that over those, over time, my I'd photographed many things like the poll tax riots in Trafalgar Square, Princess Diana's funeral, the Yugoslav civil war in Croatia, and twice commissioned to photograph the Queen inside Buckingham Palace, and twice. Was and still am actually ranked second in the UK of photographers on Free Index purely through customer review. So I got a great reputation for myself that I built up over that time. And the thing is that I felt that, and at the time that I admitted to myself that I was trans, it had been an established brand for 22 years. And I just felt that it was such a strong brand, and I was quite well known as Martin then. So I just felt that if I changed the name to Katie Neeves Photography and Film, nobody would know who that was. And it would be like starting from scratch. And so I just felt that even though I was the only person working in that business, I just felt I had to try and treat it as a brand name and detach myself from the brand. So instead of being Martin from Martin Neeves Photography and Film, I'd be Katie from Martin Neeves Photography and Film. So in order to do that, I had to come out very openly, very honestly, very publicly as being trans, and continue to do that. So I decided to make a coming out video, and that's what you showed. You showed the first minute of it at the start of this live stream. And so on the 26th of April 2018, I decided to make that video public. So I sent it to all my clients, and I put it on all my social media. Go big or go home. And I remember now, say it was only the first minute that you showed on. If you want to see the whole video, it's on my website. It's on the About Me page of my website. And Anyway, I remember now my finger nervously hovering over the mouse, knowing as soon as I make that click to make the video live, my life would never be the same again. I clicked the mouse and I waited, but then
Yeah.
I had to go out on a job. But my mind wasn't on the job.
Yeah.
I got the pictures taken as quickly as I could. The client was happy with the pictures and everything, but I couldn't wait to get back to see what was happening on Facebook, because that was the first one.
Mm.
I was so frightened because my whole livelihood, my reputation, everything rested on the reaction to that one video. It's the most important video ever made in my life. But I needn't have worried, because when I got back, I was inundated with hundreds of messages of support. It was amazing. I felt so loved. I really did. And I didn't do any work for 3 whole days because I was so busy doing, replying to all these lovely messages of support. And it went from being something that I was absolutely dreading to
Mm.
being one of the most uplifting experiences of my life. Right up there with the birth of my daughter. It was amazing. It really was. So that was me, well and truly outed.
Do you know what? I mean, like you say, that sort of like that sense of euphoria and sense of happiness, but I think that is something that comes about when you have been living in a box that isn't your box, you've labeled with a label that
Oh,
isn't you, and to the freedom that comes with
oh,
saying, actually, do you know what? Screw this. This is who I am, and
oh,
it's a tough journey, but this is who I am. And to be unapologetically yourself, I think,
oh,
is probably one of the most beautiful things a
oh.
person can do.
Absolutely. I'm so much happier. It's the real me. And I've lost count of the number of people who've told me that I look so much happier now. And I'm not surprised. It feels fantastic. I'm absolutely loving my new life. I really am. And so as well as getting all these lovely messages of support from friends and from clients, I also got messages of support from other trans people who'd seen it and said that they'd been struggling with it and that what I said had helped them. And so they thanked me for it. There was one particular message that really struck a chord with me, and that was from a woman whose son had gender issues when he was going through puberty.
Mm.
And she said that he was being treated for it at a gender clinic for kids. And she was worried at the time
Mm.
that he would either be bullied or he'd self-harm or he'd
Yeah.
attempt suicide. And she was right to be worried. I mean, there are lots of stats about this, but
Mm.
Stonewall's Trans Mental Health Survey of 2012 showed that 48% of trans people in the UK have attempted suicide at least once, and 84% have thought about it.
Mm.
Now, I'm not surprised at those stats because most of my trans friends, people have tried. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I haven't, but
Mm.
most of my trans friends have. And she said to me, she said, if only there was someone like you around, at the time that her son was going through this, just to
Yeah.
let him know that it's okay to be trans, because it
Mm.
really is okay to be
Yeah.
trans. And that really got me thinking. I thought, I've really got to do some good with this. So I decided to vlog my whole journey and bring people along on the journey with me. And so I could reach out to other trans people to let them know that it's okay to be trans, but also to educate everyone else along the way, and just to show them that trans people are just ordinary people who want to be safe, loved, and happy, just like everyone else. And that's it. That's
Yeah.
all it is. We just want to be happy. That's all it is. And so my
Fundamental human right, though, isn't it? Being happy is a
absolutely,
right
absolutely.
that nobody should, take away from anybody else.
Absolutely. And then what happened? My story was then picked up initially by the local media, and I started doing interviews for local radio and local newspapers, and then it escalated, and I started doing stuff for national radio and television and national newspapers and magazines. And so all of a sudden, I've become this trans ambassador, if you like, and it just sort of happened. And I just think that a lot of prejudice and bigotry comes from a fear of the unknown. So if you can take that unknown away, then you're
Yeah.
doing a really good thing. So I think education is the key here. So the more education there is, the more acceptance there will be. Then the more acceptance there will be, the easier it would be for other trans people to A, admit it to themselves that they're trans. That's the
Yeah.
hardest thing. And then B, do something about it and
Yeah.
live their best life. Because ultimately, that's what we all want to do, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is what I'm saying. It's like, living your best life, living your most authentic life, and being unapologetically yourself. And, I've always said that, you know what, self-happiness is such an important component of living a fulfilled life. Obviously, I'm not, I wouldn't say sort of like, your happiness shouldn't come at the harm of others, but there's again, the harm to others is on a spectrum, because actually harm to their ego that doesn't matter, that's their ego, they can deal with it. But actually living your truth and actually, you know, speaking your truth, I mean, that there must be such an element of freedom to that. And you know, do you find that you know, obviously because we're from the same era, you know, we both grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we know, you know, back then you had sort of like Kenny Everett or Les Dawson, you know, sort of like the cross-dressing, and they made them very caricaturish characters, which were all quite laughable. Do you think the media has gotten better with, you know, talking about transgender people?
A balanced answer for this one, yes and no. I think there are more. There's more in the media. There are more stories, and there are more. There are more good stories, and that are treated well. However, the mainstream media is still very transphobic, to be honest, and we have a really tough time of it with the mainstream media, and a lot of there's a big anti-trans lobby out there. Not big. They're a small group of people, but they're very noisy. They're very well funded. They're very well organized, and they've got connections in very high places. And the media listen to them, and they feed them all this misinformation about trans people, and they just want to bang on about toilets the whole time and how we're a danger to cisgender women, that's non-trans women, which is complete rubbish. You know, we're not. We just want a wee in safety, just like everybody else does. Yeah, that's all it is. Yeah. So they just want to bang on about that all the time, and so there's a lot of hate whipped up about it, and so. Yeah, it's sort of gone backwards, and so. I mean, I find that in general, I've been very well accepted, and out and about. I don't get any problems at all. I'm very lucky. Although quite a lot of my trans friends do have problems, so I don't want to sort of say anything about that. But certainly, I found that I've been very well accepted. But trans hate crime is increasing dramatically. The number of anti-trans stories in the press and in the mainstream media is going up. It's really bad, and also in social media as well. I think with social media, when you create an account for social media, you don't have to provide any sort of ID. So people tend to they hide behind their fake names and their avatars, and they post all sorts of stuff that they wouldn't dare say to your face.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, if they were accountable. Whereas when I put stuff on social media, it's the real me. It's my real name. I'm easily traceable. This is who I am. It's my real picture. It's me, and so I'm responsible for what I say. They're not, and I'm like, recently I had over 1,000 messages of hate. But I know that that's part of the job because I do put my head above the parapet as a trans person, so I know that I'm going to get it. It shouldn't be part of the job, but it is.
That's what I'm going to say, because actually it's like I don't think anybody should be subjected to any sort of hatred for being who they are and actually speaking up for others. And one of the things I've actually said is that what actually social media platforms, what they really do need to do is have a verification tool, not just with your phone number, but actually they should be a photo verification, saying that actually if you want to set up an account, you need to have they need to be able to video you to show that this is you that is setting up the account. You're right. There are so many people that are hiding behind fake profiles. And ultimately it's either to spy on others or to but it can be quite ominous. But I mean, like, Katie, sort of like moving on, because I'm sort of conscious of the time as well.
I told you you've got to rename your show, didn't I?
I know.
50 minutes. You've got no chance with me. I tell you, I talk so much.
My love, you know what? It's like, normally it's me that talks 10 to the dozen, but I mean, I don't think I've had any of the double 15 minutes that have actually. I think maybe out of the sort of like the last year's worth of shows I've been doing, maybe one has been within a half-hour period.
Really?
Stayed half an hour, but most of them. So yeah, I think I need to.
I knew you wouldn't stand a chance with me.
But it's such an interesting conversation. It'd be great if we could actually maybe set another date for you to talk a little bit more about the journey and the actual practicalities of it, because I think it'll be good for people to, sort of like have a wider platform, because I know that you do a lot on social media. So if people want to sort of reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get hold of you or have to deal with you?
Well, my website's on the screen there, so cooltobetrans.co.uk, and the links to it, to my social media as well. So I'm on social media as either Cool to Be Trans or as Katie Neeves. So yeah,
Mm.
if you look me up, I'm on all of them. I'm on all the social media, and I say I do sort of lots of trans awareness training and public speaking and media appearances, and then also support other trans people as well, because a lot of them contact me. So yeah, just feel free to contact me. Love to hear from you.
That's amazing. So we've had Lisa, who's come back saying the social media might be one for later. If we're talking about social media, how should someone like me, relatively inactive, few friends online, haha, make it black and white that I support trans, be actively pro-trans? Should I post, include it in my profile? Is that useful or not? So yeah, that's actually a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, share. So I mean, send me a Facebook friend request or LinkedIn or whatever you want to do, whichever platform you want to, Twitter or whatever, and send me a request and whatever, and then follow me, and then repost stuff that I do, comment on them, like it, share it, do all that stuff. It really all really helps because obviously I mean I can sort of say my stuff to as many people as I possibly can, but it really helps if allies help as well, and because we as trans people we're only 1% of the population, so we're a relatively small group, so we can't do it on our own. We need the help of our allies, and there's lots of things that the allies can do as well. So even just things like putting your pronouns on your profiles on your social media and on your and on your email signatures and things like that, because it just shows that pronouns aren't just for weird people like me. They are for everyone. So that sort of thing can help. Stick up for trans people. If you hear any transphobic remarks, it might be easier and the polite thing to do to say nothing. But if you stick up for them, it really does make a difference. And that happened to me, actually. It happened, I was obviously before lockdown and everything, I was at an event just over a year ago. And I was at an event where quite a lot of people in the room who knew me. And I was told about a conversation between two men who were the other side of the room. And one of them said to the other, "Oh, you see that woman over there? She used to be Martin Neeves. I don't get it myself." And he was talking quite disparagingly about me. But thankfully, the man that he was talking to had the benefit of watching quite a lot of my vlogs. And he said, "Well, actually, there's a lot more to it than that." And he went on to educate this other man. And it was brilliant. And I thought, that is what a true ally does. Because I was only told about the conversation after the event. And I thought it was brilliant. And and it would have been so much easier for him to have said nothing, but he didn't. He stood up for me. And so that I really do thank him for that. And that's what true allies do.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, because it's like, when again, like I say, I'm not, I'm not trying to sort of like water this subject area down, but it's like with anybody that is part of a marginalised group, without allies, we don't stand, a chance to actually educate people. So
No.
Katie, what is the sort of like next? Because I know you're doing a lot of seminars, you're doing a lot of talks. Is this something you're going to take further, maybe into sort of like the education system as well, and maybe start getting some education going within schools, colleges, and universities?
Yeah, I'd like to. Well, I already do in the universities. So I've been doing some for Leicester University. I've been doing some training some of their student nurses. So their second year student nurses I've been doing. I'm going to be doing a talk actually for Leicester Uni for their medical students, for the trainee doctors. So I'm going to be doing that quite soon actually. So I'm going to be doing it there. So I'd like to certainly do more of that. Definitely, there definitely needs to be more education. I mean, right across the board. So in companies, it's mainly been it's a lot of corporate companies. I've been doing stuff for people like Virgin Media and Ofcom and Aviva and NG and people like that I've been doing stuff for. So I've been doing quite a lot for them. But everyone needs it. It needs to be everywhere. And there's just a lack of awareness everywhere. And I think a lot of people are nervous before talking to me because they don't want to say something that might upset me. And whereas I just hope that I can just put them at their ease and just show that I'm just an ordinary person, and I'm here to educate them. I'm here to help. And if they do, I mean, I think most people are very supportive, but a lot of people use clumsy language. But that's fine because I can help them with that.
Yeah. I mean, we had that, didn't we? When we had a conversation a few days ago where I asked you, about sort of like, transgender, transsexual, and also sexual preferences, because, I'm learning, I'm still,
Yeah,
educating myself, and, the only way to do it is actually to ask questions. It's like children. When children want to know something, what do? They ask the question. They don't
yeah,
worry about, is
no,
this person going to be offended? Am I saying the right thing? It's, if you don't ask, you don't get.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
and, to build that up.
Yeah, and what I try to do is create that safe space so that people can ask. And I always say, whenever I do my training sessions, I always say to people, "This is your safe space to ask me absolutely anything, even if it's something that you might think might be offensive to other trans people. You can ask it, and I will answer it. And I'll
Yeah.
tell if it is something that would be offensive to ask another trans person. I'll let you know that it
Mm.
would be offensive to ask that of another trans person, but I will still answer it because
Yeah.
they need to know it, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Or help them reframe the question so that they can
Mm.
get the information that they want, but maybe, in a way that wouldn't offend others. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it is just about reframing the question and saying,
Yeah.
you know,
It's like I've lost count of the number of people who, when I come out to them as being trans, if they haven't already guessed from my deep voice. But so often the first question they'll ask me will be about my genitalia or about surgery.
mm,
Well, you wouldn't ask a cisgender, that's a non-trans person,
yeah,
about their genitalia or operations when you first meet them. I would think you'd at least need to buy them a large gin and tonic first, wouldn't you? You'd need to know them really well, wouldn't you? And
yeah,
normally you'd let that person take the lead on that sort of subject. And many trans people might want to tell you about that sort of thing if they've just been through surgery or whatever.
yeah,
But I don't think they ask it out of malice. I think it's just a lack of education on the subject. I think a lot of people think that transition is all just about lower surgery and that's it. But it's not. There are loads of different steps along the way, and it takes years to do it. So
mm,
lots and lots of steps, and lower surgery is only one of those steps. It's a big step, but it's only one of the steps. And many trans people don't take that step for lots of very valid reasons. And
mm,
they are just as valid and just as trans as the people who do take that step. So, and it's only of consequence, genitalia is only of consequence to that person
mm,
and their sexual partner. It's of no interest and no consequence to anybody else at all.
mm.
So they're just asking it just out of more curiosity, really. Yeah. And to
And
keep the conversation going, I think.
yeah, and look, let's be honest, okay? As humans, we do have a morbid fascination for things. Like, when we hear about things, ominous things that have happened, I think it just sort of happens to be human nature that, okay, well, how did that happen? Well, it's just humans.
Yeah.
However, like you say, it's a private, personal thing. I mean, I sort of like worked within urology for a while because I'm as a woman in science in the pharmaceutical industry. So I was at a talk where there was a surgeon who was talking about transition,
Mm.
surgery, which I found absolutely fascinating. Not because of anything to do with how do you go from a man to woman or woman to man, but it's just the technology behind it that
Oh,
fascinated
yeah.
me. That was for me. But then other people are going to want to know, well, and there is going to be a morbid, curiosity about it, or just a curiosity because for a lot of people it's a little bit alien, and it's
Mm.
just a deep voice. Do you know what? There's a singer called Usha Uttam who's a Bollywood singer, and she has a very deep voice, and she's not trans, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's
Well,
sort of
I mean, my voice has lightened a bit from previously, but the thing is that with transgender women going through transition, our voices don't deepen naturally with the hormones because we've already been through male puberty, and so our voices are broken. So it's resonating at a much lower frequency, and so
yeah,
you can't unbreak. Once it's broken, you can't unbreak it. Whereas for trans men, so people are transitioning from female to male,
yeah,
they take testosterone, and so when they go through male puberty, their voices break, and so their voices get deeper naturally. But
mm,
obviously, with trans women, it doesn't. So it's down to voice coaching, or there is an operation you can have for it, but it does mean that you can't speak for a week, and I don't think I'd manage that.
I need to get you and my mum in the room together because I tell you what, she talks for England as well.
I am a bit of a gob on a stick, I'm afraid. um, but yeah, yeah, I mean, I've had a bit of voice coaching, and so it has helped. But so it used to be deeper than it was, But it's still got some way to go. But also, I've got much more comfortable with my own voice. My whole journey is about authenticity, and this is my authentic voice. And
Yeah,
why should I have to change my voice just to make it fit in with the gender binary norms, just to make other people feel more comfortable? Well,
yeah,
I shouldn't really, but I know that it would make my life easier in certain circumstances. So,
yeah.
for instance, I'm very lucky. I very rarely get misgendered when I'm out and about, but I get misgendered all the time on the phone. I get called sir all the time on the phone. It's so annoying,
Yeah.
and but it's crazy that these companies that they insist that their salespeople, when they phone up, they get them to, or anybody who's on the end of of a phone, they get them to call the caller sir or madam. Well,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
that's making them guess what the gender of the caller of the other person is just by the sound of their voice. Well, I can guarantee that I have never ever bought anything from a salesperson who's called me sir. The phone has just gone straight down. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. But the minute they start saying "madam," I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to talk to you now. I'm going to put the phone down
Yeah.
because that's impersonal, and I think that's a
Yeah.
failing on the company's part. Not against transgender, but I think that's a
No.
failing on their part in not training their team to build rapport. That's a whole other ball.
Absolutely, absolutely, and there are a lot of non-binary people around as well who don't fit into to sir or madam anyway. So, you know,
It's just
no,
ask a question like, can I call you Katie? Can I call you Rupa? And then actually write the person's name down so that if
yeah,
you do it, because I mean, I'm one of these where I might meet someone, I'll be like, oh, right, okay, your name's Katie, and I'll just blah, 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 talk away, and I was like, I've forgotten your name.
no,
What's your name again? But if you write it down and you're doing a telesales job, you write the name down, and
yeah,
then, but I think that's a whole other sort of like area of training that a
oh
lot of
yeah,
call
yeah.
center people
But
will need.
that's a lot of the stuff I talk about all that when I do my trans awareness training and stuff. Yeah,
Right, I mean, because again, I know we sort of like go a little bit over, but
I
one
knew we would.
I know. I always do though. Here's the question I want to ask you: Is you said you went to a counsellor. Now, the mental health services that are available. What level of support outside of this counsellor? What level of support did you get from the mental health services? And do you think there is a do you think there's sort of like a gap there for sort of like further training, and also with like your GPs?
Okay. Well, I didn't have any help at all from other counsellors, but I didn't look for it. The only counselling I had was what I found myself and paid for myself, and
Mm,
I don't know if any would be available, and I don't know if they would be trained sufficiently in it or not. I don't know, because the thing is, it's not a mental illness. It's not a condition. We're just normal people. The problem is with the label that we're given at birth. That's what's the problem is. It's
mm,
not. There's nothing. And in some parts of the world, they've actually stopped putting labels on babies. Having to put their sex on birth certificates. Tasmania was the first place in the world to do it, and I think we're a long way off doing that here. But anyway, I'm going off on a
that's,
tangent.
that's a whole other
That's a
ball.
whole, yeah. But
What I mean by that is not that being trans or gay is a mental illness,
no,
but it's more about what level of support do because actually, I'll tell you, sort of like years ago, I used to work within in a pharmaceutical company, but selling within mental health. And there was a psychiatrist that I worked very closely with. I mean, he was a complete maverick. I loved the way he worked because he literally didn't follow the guidelines that were set. And he was chair of the the Royal College of Psychiatrists as well for the East Midlands. Amazing psychiatrist, and he was actually setting up a clinic for the transgender community, and this is going back to probably sort of like the mid 2000s, where he was setting it up. So because he said he recognised that there was support that was needed there. So that, I suppose that's the aspect I'm coming from. Not that it's a mental illness, but in terms
no.
of what level of support is there for transgender within sort of like the services to help them deal with the depression, the anxiety, the suicidal ideation, and the self-harm, because those are mental health illnesses.
Not particularly well supported, to be honest. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, to be honest. And you asked me about GPs as well. GPs can be it's a lottery as to whether they'll be supportive or not, because they're not trained in this.
Mm,
They're not trained at all, and most of them haven't got a clue. And
mm,
and I knew that when I went along to my GP to ask for referral to gender clinic, I knew that basically the GPs are the gatekeepers to get
mm,
to a gender clinic, to an NHS gender clinic, and without their support, you're not going to get there. And
mm,
so many refuse. They refuse to refer you, and I know of so many, and so much so that there is actually there's a list that's on
mm,
the internet of supportive GPs, trans supportive GPs. There shouldn't be a need for a list of supportive trans supportive GPs. They should all be trans supportive, but they're not, and they're not trained in it at all. It's terrible. Um, and so when I went to see my GP, at the time I'd been lucky, I'd been very healthy, so I didn't know my GPs that well, not well enough to know, well, to second guess who might be supportive and who might not be.
mm,
But I just knew that I felt more comfortable talking to female,
mm,
well, talking to women about it. So
yeah,
I asked for a female GP, and I was
mm,
very lucky with the. In fact, I was extremely lucky with the GP that I was given for that appointment. She was brilliant. She couldn't have been more supportive. She was lovely, but she admitted to me that she'd never treated a trans patient before, and she didn't know the
mm,
pathway. She didn't, but I knew, I was expecting that. So I
mm,
had actually preempted that, and I printed off a load of information from the NHS website and said, "There you go, there's some bedtime reading for you." And she
yeah,
was really grateful, and she's since put herself on courses, and she's been brilliant. She's been so supportive. She's been great. Um, and then she referred me to a gender clinic. Now, do you know how long the waiting list is just to get a first appointment at a gender clinic?
if appointments are anything to go by, I'd probably say maybe 12 to 18 months, or is it longer or less?
It's between 3.5 and 6.5 years.
No way.
Not months, years. And that's just to get a first appointment. And at that first appointment, you don't get treated. It's just a chat with a nurse. And
Mm,
then you have to wait probably about another year before you get to see a psychotherapist. And then after that, it's the third appointment that they actually start prescribing hormones and blockers. And then it's only the fourth appointment they start talking about surgery. You have to have two signatures for the surgery. And then after that, you then get put on a further waiting list for surgery. It's a really long process.
wow.
So I was in the fortunate enough position. I was able to afford to pay to go to a private gender clinic, but there
Mm,
can be year-long waiting lists just to be seen at a private gender clinic, and you're paying for it. Yeah, but that's because there's so much demand and not enough supply. But I was very lucky. I got a cancellation appointment, and I was actually seen within 2 months, which I was very, very lucky. So I've been on hormones and blockers now for nearly 3 years now.
crikey. So we're then in that case, we're sort of like looking at, from the moment of sort of like firstly going to your GP to ask for a referral, you're looking at anything between what, 5+ years before you actually even get a conversation about transitioning, sort of like
It's
surgery.
horrendous. It's horrendous.
I can just imagine. I mean, you see, this doesn't, for me, this doesn't make any sense financially. I'm not, humanly, it doesn't make sense because the turmoil that the
No.
transgender, person is going through is, the
Well,
man or woman is going through is
you
horrific.
you wonder why the suicide stats are so high.
This is what I was getting to. So, I mean, how much, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like how much, and I'm going to be very clinical in terms of finances here, but the NHS is crying out for money. But how much money then will have been spent in mental health services, GP appointments, counsellors, referrals to psychiatrists for the transgender man or woman before they even get to that point. So then you're talking 5-6 years worth of appointments,
Yeah.
which has actually cost a huge amount.
Oh,
Whereas
yeah.
actually, if the finances were, or the budget was opened up to make it shorter
Yeah.
waiting times
But
and to actually get them educated.
mm, but it's not just that. There's lots of other stuff to pay out for as well. Things like paying for
Mm,
facial hair removal, and which
yeah,
is very expensive and very painful. So there's all that. That's not, again, on the NHS. There's a certain, once you're actually in the system, there's a
mm,
certain amount that they will allow you, that they will pay for, but it's usually not enough. And to be honest, it usually comes too late. So for me, I've
mm,
already paid for all that stuff, but
yeah,
I didn't want to wait. I couldn't wait that long until being seen and being in their system. So I couldn't wait that long. So most people end up paying for that themselves.
mm,
Um, the only surgery for in England, it's different in Scotland, but in England, the only surgery for trans women that's paid for is lower surgery. You can't
Yeah.
pay for upper surgery, so because very often, so yes, you do get breast growth with the hormones, with the estrogen that you're on, but very often, more often than not, you don't get enough that looks realistic enough for a male-sized torso. So most trans women end up having breast augmentation, but that's not available on the NHS. And there's also things like facial feminization surgery. I'm very lucky that I've already got a heart-shaped face, and I sort of I don't feel the need for any facial feminization surgery, whereas lots of my trans friends do, and some of the stuff they've had done is just horrific that they've had to go through. But they have to pay for all of that themselves, and so lots of people end up paying for their own lower surgery because they can't wait. They just feel they can't wait long enough for the NHS to appointment to do it, and that's really expensive. And so many people go outside the country. Lots of people go to Thailand for it. It's just there's an awful lot to pay up for, and also that coupled with the fact that a lot of trans people end up going through divorce, as I did, so you end up being a lot poorer because of that. So that hits your finances massively, and also a lot of trans people end up being out of work as well. There's a lot of prejudice. I mean, there's a survey done recently that showed that 1 in 3 UK employers won't employ a trans person. And that I'm not surprised. I'm surprised those stats aren't higher, because most of my trans friends have struggled getting work. And so often.
That just winds me up, because I'm just saying, sorry to talk over you, but it really winds me up, because it's the same with, I mean, it's not the same. Sorry, please, let me rephrase that. How in the world does your genitalia dictate whether you've got the ability to do that job or not? Now, there are going to be some jobs where physically certain people, and not men or women, I'm talking people generally, humans, may not have the physicality to do that job. So, for example, a lot of people in construction, I know a load of men that wouldn't have the strength to be in construction, but I know a load of women that actually would have the strength to be in construction. So actually, why should your genitalia dictate your ability to do the job? And that, to me, this whole narrow-minded attitude. Sorry, I'm going to go on my soapbox now, because I really feel that about race as well, because this is something that sort of like the South Asian diaspora, or women particularly, sort of have to face, and Black women face all the time. It's like our colour, our gender dictates whether we're going to be getting that job that moves into senior management. Why? And why should you embracing who you really are mean that you don't get a job? That just winds me up. Sorry, I'm a very calm person, but there's certain injustices that really do piss me right off.
I pressed your buttons there, didn't I?
Let's get into this debate. But we're on the same page anyway with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but the thing is that if companies do discriminate against trans people, then they're on sticky wicket, because gender reassignment is a protected characteristic of the gender, of the Equality Act 2010. So that and there've been some high-profile cases recently where that's happened. But also, if you look on the other way, if you give them the chance to succeed, most trans people will give their all to their employer, because if you've got a supportive employer, then you're not going to want to leave. You're not going to want to go and try and find another job, and with all the anxiety that goes with that, because you don't know what the culture's like. You don't know if you're going to be bullied at the new place of work. So if you find a supportive employer, you're going to stick with them, and you're going to be so loyal. Probably be one of the best employees that they've ever had.
Do you know what I mean? I think we are getting. I mean, we are getting into sort of like now the 5 times 15 minutes. So
I'm going for a record here.
Lisa, thank you. Lisa's actually sort of like mentioned in the comments saying sort of Rupa's reaction was on point. Is this information available through your website? I mean, I think what would be really good, Katie, is once sort of like we end the show, you and I can sort of have another talk about maybe sort of like seeing what which other platforms we can use to start opening up the conversation and getting some more information out there, because I think our conversation today has literally just touched the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even begun to go into the real in-depth information. So
as you can tell, I can talk about it for ages.
It's really important subject, and and you're living it. You've lived it. You're living it, and you're going to live it for the rest of your life.
I'm living the dream.
It is though. I mean, do you know what?
Is.
Because at the end of the day, the dream is to be your authentic self, to be the real you.
It's all about being happy. It really is, and that's all it is. Trans people are just ordinary people who want to be happy, and that's it. And a lot of people talk. You talk about gender dysphoria, but not many people talk about gender euphoria, and it really is euphoric to be able to live your truth. I mean, I think you can probably agree that I look a lot happier now than at the time I was making that coming out video.
Absolutely. I mean, though I've got to say, your skin is amazing in both. I have skin envy going on.
Oh, thank you. Very kind.
As you get to know me, Katie, I don't come out with bull. I have this thing called foot in mouth disease. So literally, whatever's there comes flying out of my mouth.
Yeah, I tend to do that as well. It's got me into a lot of trouble over the years.
Oh, you know what? The trick to that is just smile very sweetly.
That's why I smile so much.
Well, there you go. You see, I love that. Tell someone they're being a bit of a bleep. And smile gently at them. No, Katie, you know what? Honestly, thank you so much for joining us. And it'd be great if we could share. Well, your website is on there anyway, and you're on Twitter, LinkedIn.
Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. What are the other ones? Oh, Instagram. And I have got TikTok. I've got that, but I don't really do much on that at the moment. I need to do more on that, but I need to work on my twerk. I need to work on my twerking for that one.
Do I've got to say, I've I sort of had a few friends who say, you need to join Twitter, because I do this and I do my Soul Provocateur podcast, which actually that was uploaded today, I sort of joined it, but actually I sort of put a few ads on, but actually I'm so busy looking at all of the dog and cat videos.
You get distracted, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm on YouTube as well. That's the other one I'm doing.
So you've got sort of
things,
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube.
Yeah, just look up "Cool to be Trans" or Katie Neeves. You'll find me. I'm all over the place. I'm all over it like a rash.
But that's good though, because you're being a voice for the voiceless, and you're leading by example, which is, we need more of that. So sort of hats off to you for doing that, because
thank you.
We need more Katies in the world who will openly voice.
Could the world cope with more Katies in the world? This is the question.
And that we will leave for the next time we meet. So, Katie, thank you so much for.
Thanks, Rupa.
It's been so brilliant talking to you, and
it's been a real pleasure. And I've got to ask you: have I got the record now for the longest broadcast?
No.
No. Oh.
No.
Keep going.
Yeah, no. If you want to, we can do that for the next show. But no, the longest one was the men's mental health one. That actually went on for near enough 2 hours, because there was just so much.
Oh wow!
Through. And then the next longest one from that was the Alzheimer's. But we could let's see if we could break the record for next time. And I'll just do it like 6 times double 15 minutes.
Are you setting me a challenge?
Always. No, Katie, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Honestly, thank you so much. And it's like, sort of, Sudha said it, and we've all sort of, anybody that knows you has said it to me, because I know Rachel who introduced us, said that you are so inspiring, and I've got to say you really are, because
thank you.
It's wonderful to meet women, men, or other women like yourself, and men who are living their truth and unafraid, or actually are living their truth, speaking up about who they are, even with the fear. They're like, don't care about the fear, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it just feels amazing to be able to live my truth, and it's great to be able to share it. And I just think I'm grateful that I'm able to do it, and that I've got a platform, and I'm getting a bit of a voice now, and that people seem to be listening, and it seems to be well received. So I'm grateful that it's doing some good.
Amazing. And have you got, if there are any people that are watching there that are at the beginning of their transgender journey, what words of advice, wisdom, or inspiration have you got for them?
I would say that fear often stops a lot of people from doing things that they really should do for their highest well-being, and it could have easily have stopped me from A, admitting to myself that I was trans, and B, from doing something about it. But I've found that reality is just so much easier than your fear. And so most people regret the things in life that they don't do, not the things they did do. So, I'd say go for it. Explore it and see where it takes you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And on that note, we're going to say bye and play your little
on my sea shanty.
I love that. I know, it just makes me smile so much. So Katie, thank you so much. And just before I play that, just say to the audience, thank you for watching, thank you for the comments. Katie's still going to have access to this, so to this program. Please do share. It's gone out on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Please share it across your platforms, because the more we spread awareness, actually, Katie, why don't you tell them?
Absolutely, yeah. So the more education there is, then the more acceptance there'll be. The more acceptance will be, easier it'll be for other trans people to live their best lives. So it really does an awful lot of good if you do share it. So please.
Please do.
Please.
If you're living your truth, then it's actually going to give, those of us who may not be trans, that may still be living in little boxes, it might give us the courage to actually, hang on a moment, if Katie can do it, then what am I afraid of?
Yeah, exactly. If you can, and it's funny, through facing that massive fear of admitting to myself as trans, to say I didn't want to be trans, but it's just who I am. Yeah. But through facing that, it's given me an awful lot of courage in doing other things, and think, well, actually, I've already faced that. That's about one of the biggest things you can face. Well, I can do that. I can do anything. And now I've got the attitude, well, let's just go for it. See what happens. What's the worst going to happen?
Yeah. I love it. I love that. So, and that's just this, isn't it? It's sort of like living in the, F it, I'm going to do it. Like,
yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah.
So,
and I think also it's just an age thing as well, that like when I was younger, I used to always worry about what other people thought of me now. But as I've got older now, I just couldn't give a stuff.
Who cares though? Because they're not paying your bills. They're not keeping a roof over your head. They're not responsible for your happiness. You are. So
and nobody else is bothered, about what you look like. I used to think, what I used to go around looking over my shoulder the whole time. What if I've got any funny looks or anything?
Yeah,
nobody gives a stuff about that. They're just too wrapped up in themselves and their own problems. They don't care about what anybody else looks like.
Well, that's it. You just have to watch TikTok to know that. But Katie, right? Otherwise, I am going to say we're going to go now, because otherwise, I think you and I will get into another conversation. But let's play out. I know. Well, we can continue this conversation after the show. But let's play out with your sea shanty. And again, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I've got Vavisha Putt joining. She is a volunteer with the Leicester branch of the Samaritans, and she's also a diversity and inclusion officer for the Samaritans. So join me next Sunday at 12. Vavisha is, young, very inspirational as well, and is doing things, again, to bring some goodness into the life. So I thank you, Katie, for joining, because I think what I'm really, what sort of like makes me so proud is that the double 15 minutes, I've got people like yourself, Vavisha, and all the guests I've had on since I've started are all such inspirational people that are living their truth. It's, to me, I'm learning so much from everybody and all of you, and I've learned a lot from you today, Katie, so thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rupa. I really appreciate it. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Right, let's play your sea shanty, otherwise we'll start a whole new conversation. See you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
There once was a girl at the age of 3, told her mum, this is how I want to be. Her mum said, no, you're a boy, it's how it's meant to be. Soon may transition come to bring me blockers and hormones, mum. Why won't you listen to me? I want to be happy. The girl grew up and her voice grew deep. Her mum saw her unhappiness creep. Her mum said, I know you're a girl, I'll support you all the way. Soon may transition come to bring me blockers and hormones, mum. At last I am the real me, and now I am happy. And now I am happy.